So I've saved out our progress into Chapter 16 Underwater Start. This is where we left off in the last lesson, and what we're going to do is take a look on how to add fog, some dust and debris elements, and some depth of field into our scene. So I'm going to grab our dust particles render that we got from Houdini and paste it down here. And let's take a look at what we're getting. So it's kind of dark out of the box, but we're getting some nice atmosphere here, and we're getting these nice particles. So what I'm going to do is drop in a grain node and bump this up, bump the multiply up. Maybe we'll do something like 30, maybe 28.5, and then we can drop the gamma down as well to make that a bit more crunchy. Something like 0.67. Now essentially what we want to do is add this into our scene, but if we drop an expression node, we can combine these red and green elements. So if I plug my expression node in, we can do RGBA, and then we'll do expression equals R plus green plus blue. And then if we just drop in a merge, and we screen that in, we get some integration, but it's looking pretty boring. We want to spice this up. So essentially what we want to do is to layer this up. So we have some foreground elements, some background elements, and some midground elements. So I'm going to add in a transform node, and then we can scale this up by 2, so we get particles that are happening really close to the scene. And if we drop in a defocus node, we can make these look out of focus. So defocus is similar to Z defocus, but it doesn't actually accept the Z depth channel, and we can just play with the focus like this, which is just kind of like a flat layer of defocusing. And then I'm just going to set this to 120 like that. And if I drop in a grade node, what we can do is really boost up these reds. So if I just jump into the red channel, and we bump it to something like 15, and then if we gamma down like that, something like 0.375, just like that. And then we can drop in another grade node for our atmosphere that's happening here. We'll just set it to affect the green channel, so we're just affecting the greens, and then we'll multiply that down just like that, something like 0.39, and then we'll also crunch the gamma just like that, something like 0.285. And now when we check out our expression node and then screen that in, we notice that we're getting some nice foreground elements. Now if we just copy and paste this setup and do it a couple times, so I'll copy all that, I'll copy the screen as well and screen that in, and then I'm going to hook up our transform. This time I'm just going to disable that transform so they end up in the middle of our screen, or the middle of our scene rather. And then we'll come into our defocus node and dial that down a bit so they're more in focus, so maybe something like 40. And then we'll come into our grade node and dial this back, something like that. And then we'll boost the gamma back up just like that. And then we'll adjust our green channel as well. We'll boost up the multiplier, just something like that. And then we'll bring the gamma down just a little bit, maybe something like 0.22. And then if we look at what we're getting some midground particles. And then we'll copy paste that setup, just like that, hook it up. And this time instead of defocusing, we'll just leave that enabled so we get those guys. And then we'll bring back our transform, but this time we want to just leave it at 1, but essentially what's going to happen is we're now getting some duplicates going on, so you can see that they're actually being defocused right where our particles are. So we'll just want to mirror this. So if I jump down to my scale and I click this 2 option right there, we'll just set this to a -1 in the width just to flip that. And then if we come into our grade nodes, what we're going to do is just shut off the green channel completely so we don't want any atmosphere from there. So I'm just going to slam the multiply all the way down to 0. And then for our grade node, if we jump up here, what we can do is just slam the gamma down just like that. Something like 0.22. And then if we look at what we're getting, merges all those in. So let's add some atmosphere into our scene. So just like in our early example, what we can do is shuffle out our point position camera pass. So I'll select our point position camera. What I'm going to do is grab our blue channel, which is our depth, and then I'm just going to remap this with the grade node. So I'm going to deselect this and select our background, select our foreground, and you notice we're getting this Z depth information. And then what I'm going to do is drop in a shuffle node to remap that into the alpha channel. So you notice we're not getting the alpha right here. So if I drop in a shuffle, we'll shuffle the red channel into the alpha, and then we'll drop in another grade node and we'll hook that up by using the mask into that channel. So now what we can do is add some atmosphere in there like that. So let's work on our depth map. I'm going to just select 4 to get these down to a single float value. We'll just do something like -55 and then -109, just like that, and we'll use that for the map. And then we'll jump back to our grade node that's adding the atmosphere, and then we'll just do -10 and then +10 to kind of flatten that out. So now let's take a look at adding some depth of field into our scene. So I'm going to drop in a Z to focus, and then we're going to make our Z depth channel. So I'll shuffle out our point position camera pass again. So the RG, or just grabbing the blue channel from our point position camera pass. And then I'm just going to remap it like this. So we'll select the white point closest to the camera, or black point furthest away, just something like that. And then we'll grab our image. And then what we're going to do is shuffle copy rather. And we'll grab any one of those channels. So I'll just grab red into, we'll grab all those and we'll shuffle them into depth, and it'll just take the top channel by default. And then we'll set our focus point just like that, and now we're getting some depth of field. Then what I'm going to do is just play with the size a bit, so maybe something like 20. We'll get some nice foreground depth of field happening. Maybe we'll go back down to something like 10. Perfect. So let's incorporate our air bubbles into the scene. So maybe there's an air pocket back here with some bubbles coming up. So I'm going to jump up to our bubbles pass that came from Houdini. Just copy and paste it down here. And what I'm going to do is just merge that in with a screen. So operation, set that over to screen just like that. And then what I'm going to do is drop in a transform node and then reposition this right back here. So it's coming up directly from behind the teapot like that. And I'm just going to scale it down like that. And then if I drop in a grade node and then boost up the exposure to something like 10, and then essentially what we need to do is we need to create a mat to cut this out, right? So it lives, so the air pocket's coming from behind the teapot. In this case, what I'm going to do is use the point position pass for this. So we'll drop in point position camera, just like that. And I'm going to use blue for all the channels, drop in a grade node, and then we'll select white for the background and then black right on the teapot, just like that. So we'll select our black to be right there. And now essentially what we're getting is a mat for the background. So I'm just going to clamp this as much as I can. So select the white point somewhere right in there. So now we have a mat that's coming directly behind the teapot. Now if I clamp this and if I drop in another shuffle, and we don't have anything in the alpha, so we'll shuffle the red into the alpha, and then we'll just use this as a mask for our screen. Cool. So we're noticing our image, it's getting pretty flat. I'm ultimately going to end up doing a grade on this at the very end, a color grade. So in the time being, what I'm going to do is just adjust our gamma overall, just so we can get a better visual representation of what's going to happen. And now let's add in some volumetric grades coming from top down. So to do that, what I'm going to do is just drop in a noise. I'm going to bring down the X and Y values, so something like 30. Drop in a volume raise node, And then we can play around with this. So we get something like that. So then we'll just drop in a transform node. By hitting T, we'll merge that in with an over. So we're getting this, but what we want to do is actually bring this up like that. And then really scale this down like that. So they're more vertical, just something like that. And then if I drop in a grade node, what we can do is boost this up so that we can see it better. Maybe something like 20. And we can play with that transform node again and just kind of bring this down, just something like that. And then I'm just going to soften this up a bit so they're not so sharp. Something like this. Maybe a value of 30. And then on the over, what we can do is just mix this back, just something like that. So we're getting a subtle amount. Cool. So the foreground is looking pretty bright, and it'd be nice to add some contrast to this image. So what we can do is actually maybe do a little vignette that'll kind of darken this foreground area up. So if I drop in a grade node, and if I hit O to drop in a roto node, we'll use this as a mask, just like that. And then I'll drop in a B-spline, and then maybe we'll do something like this. Just like that. And then if we slam the multiply down, you'll notice that we're getting the opposite of what we want. So if we just throw in an invert, just like that. And then if we blur that, something like this, we notice we get a nice vignette happening on the foreground. And I'm just going to tweak this a little bit, just so we're getting this top edge like that. And maybe we'll come in here and move this up a little bit as well. So that's looking good. Let's see if we can get some actual gradation going from front to back. So maybe the camera's poking through like a cave or something like that. And overall, this area back here is just a lot brighter. So we want some gradation going from front to back. What we can do is if we drop in a point position camera pass again. So point position camera, we'll use blue for all the channels. Then what we'll do is we'll drop in another grade node and we'll select the foreground for our map, background. Actually, let's reverse that. So we'll do white in our background and then black in our foreground, just like that, just so we can straight multiply that in. And I'm just going to make sure that we clamp that beforehand so we don't get any values going above 1. And then we'll multiply that in just like this. And if I just mix that in just like that, you notice we get that nice gradation going from front to back. Cool. So the last thing we want to do is add a really nice color grade. We'll come back and kind of clean up some of this stuff too. But we want to add a really nice color grade into the scene. I already have this example set up, so I'm going to just copy and paste this over so that we can break this down together. So if I plug this in and if I reset my exposure, just like that, if I come down here, we're noticing we get the color grade. So this is where a lot of the magic really happens to get this kind of underwater feel to it. So let's break this down. The grade node, all we're doing here is that we're multiplying in this bluish color, just like that. And then the color lookup, what we're doing is we're adding this S-curve. So I'm just going to bring this up a little bit, just like that. So the master channel, we're adding this slight S-curve to it, just like that. And then in each one of these channels, we're just shifting them just a little bit. So I'm actually taking down the red, just like that. So if I copy and paste this over here, so we can play around with it, you notice we get this when we play with that red value, just like that. And then if I linearize these just by hitting L, we'll see what happens. So we're kind of giving it some contrast there. And if I go into my green, that's all left alone, but in my blue, notice we're lifting that. So if I get rid of that, bring that up, you notice we're adding a little bit of blue in there. So I'm just going to replace that with the original, just like that. And then the very last thing we're doing is we're just adding a little bit of gamma in there. So if I just drop in a gamma node and crunch that down a little bit, just like that. Cool. So last thing I'm going to do is just kind of add some grain in here. So I'm just going to drop in the default grain node. You notice we're starting to get some grain. And if I just tone this down a bit, just like that, we'll get some nice film grain on there. So let's go back a little bit and tweak this stuff. These particles are looking a little hot, so let's go back and dissect that a little bit. So if I jump back to my dust particles, you'll notice that they're coming from this background layer right there. So if I take a look at that and disable this, we're getting these really hot particles coming from that layer. So what we can do is just come back to this gray channel right here and tone that way back. Just like that. So actually we'll just keep that disabled actually. Notice we're still seeing a little bit here, so if we want to, what we can do is come up here and draw a rotospline. So I'm going to drop O, drop in a B-spline, and then cut those off just like that. We could do another point position, pass 2, and cut out based off that, but I'm just going to do this really quick. And if I plug that in, you'll notice all of them disappear. So what we actually want to do is invert that, and then we'll just make sure that we're softening up that mask a little bit, so we're not getting any matte lines. So something like that. Cool, and then if we want to write this out, what we can do is just drop in our viewerlet, just like that. If we come down here, it'll tell us, hey, turn off the input process, and then flip back on our sRGB, and then we can just drop in a write node, and then write this out to disk. Cool, so in the next lessons, what we're going to do is kind of take a look at the cover images and see how they were built, and do a nice breakdown of that.